right. Joining me is Fred Krueger, co-author of a brand new book. It's called The Big Bitcoin Book, which walks through the complete history of Bitcoin and also covers Bitcoin's evolution over the past 15 years. And we'll certainly talk about that book. But I'll tell you, Fred is someone who I actually came across on Twitter or X, and it was very clear to me he is extremely passionate when it comes to Bitcoin. And so, as I was thinking through people who could help tell the story of Bitcoin, really in a way that anyone could understand, Fred immediately came to mind. And so, Fred, thank you for joining me. Welcome to Crypto Prime.
Nate, thanks. Appreciate it.
And by the way, when I say Crypto Prime, is that like nails on the chalkboard for you? Because my understanding is Bitcoin maxis, which I believe you are. You can tell me if that's not the case, but you're not necessarily fond of the term crypto. Is that fair or no?
It's fair. I think, I fall into a kind of a sort of newer breed of maxi where I think we would define ourselves as Bitcoin first, right? And so we're not 100% completely anti other chains, but we feel our view is that ultimately it's going to be a Bitcoin world in the next decades. And so those chains may have a role, but it really is all going to be, it's going to be about Bitcoin, and really the unit of account is going to be Bitcoin. So that's kind of where I think I'm not totally hating on other chains, but I don't think they're going to be able to compete with Bitcoin. Let me put it that way. Anybody who's trying to compete with Bitcoin is going to lose.
So let's put a pin in that. I want to talk a little bit more about that later. I'm going to play a little devil's advocate with you. But to start, let's talk about your background and how you first got involved with Bitcoin. And I know, Fred, it's a little bit cliche in that everyone has a Bitcoin origin story, right? But
yeah, sure.
I do think that offers some nice context around why you're so passionate when it comes to this topic. So tell us a little bit about your background, and then I'd love to hear your Bitcoin origin story.
Sure. So my background is I have a PhD in math and OR from Stanford, and I was, hired into Salomon Brothers in 1986, and so I was part of the John Merriweather bond arbitrage quants on Wall Street revolution that hit about a couple years earlier. So I was one of the very first quant traders on Wall Street, and I was there through the Salomon bond auction scandal. I left and went to Greenwich Capital, where I did exactly the same thing. So I have the first part of my life was in bond arbitrage trading, right, and structuring deals. So I created a few instruments, that made Salomon Brothers a lot of money and made Greenwich Capital a lot of money. And so I have expertise I have this Wall Street expertise. Then I left, and for the next 2 decades, I built a series of software companies and internet companies, and I have 10 exits. So I have created and started and sold 10 companies, a total exit value of $500 million. So I'm pretty serial, and kind of at the end of my kind of entrepreneurial vision journey, I kind of got involved in I had a sort of a startup that turned into a crypto startup because I created a wallet for a blockchain called EOS when that came out. And so I built the leading wallet for this blockchain, got involved in wallets, and along the route, right around that time, I got orange pilled. I got orange pilled by a guy you probably know, who is Tom Lee of Fundstrat. And so I was at a Bermuda event, and I was invited because I had experience in these blockchains and wallets and stuff, and met Tom Lee, and Bitcoin was at 5,000, and Tom Lee was like, it's going to 1 million, and here's why. And, he presented a very compelling argument to me, and I got back from the trip, and I'm like, what am I doing with these other blockchains? And I need to sort of allocate some serious money to this. And so he was the one who orange pilled me. Couldn't have been at a better time, really. A little pre-Sailor, but kind of like Sailor, I had money to invest. I wasn't, just buying with nothing at the bottom. So I had some money to invest, invested at the right time, and I continued to buy and get more into Bitcoin in 2020, and so that's my journey into Bitcoin.
I love it. Tom Lee is like the quintessential permabull. So you were talking to the right person. How long ago was that?
It was in May of 2019.
That's fantastic. Okay, so let's do this. I thought, Fred, why don't we cover a few Bitcoin basics, and then
Okay.
we can certainly go more into depth. I'd love to
Sure.
hear what you think about the future price of Bitcoin. But just at a basic level, how would you describe Bitcoin to someone who is a complete novice, like somebody who doesn't understand any of this at all? How would you describe Bitcoin?
Well, it is the first finite supply cryptocurrency that it was invented by man, and it is going to replace the dollar. It's not going to replace it tomorrow, but it's going to replace all other currencies. It's going to be the money of humanity. So the way I describe it is, it's money for the 21st century. It's going to take a couple decades for that to become clear. But if just like we had this first phase, which was gold, and then sort of fiat, but backed fiat, and then we had pure fiat, and now we're having this new form of money, which is totally digital, world money, bearer money, and it can be custodied. You can custody it yourself, and it's incredibly. It's in a very once you understand it, it has this incredible use case, which is governments can't take it, and governments can't inflate it, right? And so, once people get that, and is because of its finiteness, it's likely to increase over time, right? Over time. Now, a lot of people are figuring that out, and they're not necessarily in the U.S., but they're figuring it out in places like Nigeria, or Turkey, Argentina, whatever. They're finally figuring out, wait a second, I can take this money, I can custody it myself, government can't get it, and I can give it to my daughter who's moving to Europe or America, and she can do it whatever she wants. And that's just such a compelling argument that the adoption of Bitcoin is growing pretty steadily, and the adoption meaning not the transaction volume of Bitcoin, but just people using it as a savings vehicle and as a way to protect their savings. And I think that's ultimately what Bitcoin is right now in this stage.
And so, do you think is money the best comparison? And where I'm heading with that is on the TradFi side, and we can talk about the Bitcoin ETFs here in a moment, but you'll always hear Bitcoin couched as digital gold. But with the way that you just described Bitcoin, it sounds like you view it much more as money, right? Versus I view gold as a store of value. It's not something that's really a medium of exchange. But I would also say when it comes to Bitcoin, while it certainly can be used as a medium of exchange, that doesn't seem to be the prevailing use case today. So, like, what's the right comparison? Is it money? Do you like that digital gold characterization?
I think digital gold is an insult to Bitcoin. I
Okay.
think, I
That
think,
answers that.
I think it's an insult to Bitcoin because it's sort of, you know, first of all, if you have gold, it's very difficult to sell gold. I own gold. I've owned gold since 2000, since 1998. Actually, I've owned gold. Right, so physical bars. Right, so and they've done well. Right, so I bought them at $250 an ounce. They're 10x that right now. But like selling a gold bar is not going to be easy. I own gold coins. Selling gold coins is not easy. I mean, I can bring them to a pawn shop, but that's about it, right? Gold is not easily movable and it's not easily sellable. Bitcoin is very movable, very sellable, very easy to store, very secure. Bitcoin is so much better than gold. It's not even close. It's not like it's just a little bit better than gold. It's 100x better than gold, and I think we are eventually going to realize that. And so I think the digital gold thing helps you get up to like 10x the current value. Roughly maybe 10x. Let's depending on what you call the value of gold, but let's just say Bitcoin digital gold gets you to $1 million a coin, and digital money gets you to $10 million a coin. I think we're headed to a digital money because the world needs digital money. The world needs what Bitcoin has, and but it's not going to get there immediately. It's a long journey to get there.
Okay, we can dive a little bit further into the future price here in a moment because I do have a couple of other questions around that. But just sticking with the basics here, for somebody, Fred, who has never interacted with Bitcoin in any way, shape, or form, and perhaps that seems too daunting, what would be the very basic steps you would suggest someone walk through to actually buy Bitcoin? And this isn't a recommendation for any one service or provider or anything along those lines. I'm just curious, what do you think the basic steps should be for somebody who is new to the space?
Well, the first thing is you can buy $100 worth of Bitcoin. You don't. A lot of people they view this as sort of an existential thing. Like you're telling me that I have to put all my money in Bitcoin. You're making this thing. No, for the price of a steak dinner, you can learn about Bitcoin. You can get a hardware wallet. You can get a software wallet. You can get a wallet on your phone, which is kind of the easiest thing, right? And you just download an app, and there's plenty of them. And you have a wallet that can hold Bitcoin and that can send Bitcoin to another wallet, right? So I would say the easiest way to get involved in Bitcoin is the first thing you need to do is you need to buy the Bitcoin, right? And depending on where you live, that's in the state of New York, it's a little bit more difficult than in other states. But there's lots of places that will sell you Bitcoin. I would say the easiest, I'm not recommending this. Again, I don't work there or anything, but I would say, in my opinion, the best onboarding for most states is Cash App. Because they have a very widely used app that also allows you to buy Bitcoin, okay? It's a very mainstream app run by a publicly traded company, Square. And you can own Bitcoin in your Cash App, and you can send it to another Bitcoin address, and you can also use it as a credit card, right? So you can get a credit card, which allows you to spend that Bitcoin very easily. So another one of these is Fold app, which just came out. Not just came out, but it's another one like that. And they just sent me today. I got my new Fold app Visa card, and it looks like this, And I can go use my Bitcoin, move it into the cash account, and buy a steak with it, right? So, I think that's the best way to start understanding what Bitcoin is not just to buy an ETF, but actually try it out on a smaller scale with something like Fold or Cash App. And I would say there's first thing is buy the Bitcoin. Second thing is have your wife try it out, or a friend, right? And then send them some Bitcoin, and and have them send it back to you, right? So now you've done a round trip. Like, I got the Bitcoin, I sent you the Bitcoin, you sent me back the Bitcoin. Oh wow, we're able to send Bitcoin, right? And then of course from there you can get involved in like hardware wallets, and it's a rabbit hole. You can go further and further deep on it. And then at that point you might say, wow, this actually is a great technology. It really works. Now I want to put, some of my long-term savings in this. And then, at that point, I usually tell people, you probably want to look at the ETF, right? Because if you're gonna, if you want to deal with accounting in an easy way, you want to have the thing be heavily traded. May I suggest IBIT? You know what I mean? Or FBTC? Those two, or or the Bitwise ETF if you want. They're all very low fee ETFs, very secure. Nobody's going to rob you at gunpoint and get your ETF. You know what I mean? And so, for most people, most TradFi people, ultimately, I think they're going to end up in the ETF. But I think that they would be wise to find out a little bit more about what Bitcoin is before they get in the ETF.
I love the way you describe that because, quite honestly, I've often said invest in the ETFs first just to become educated on the space. And then the hope is that leads you down the path towards actually buying Bitcoin direct on your own. But I like how you inverted that and flipped it on its head.
Yeah, I think I think the thing is people view this thing as, I have so many TradFi friends that I tried to orange bill. And I said, listen, just buy $500 worth of Bitcoin. Just try it out, And there's this block that they just sort of like, I can't do it. I can't initiate that account with Coinbase or wherever I'm going to get the ETF, right? It just feels too invasive for them to do it. But it really is not such a big deal. It's really not a big deal. And so get over your phobia of you might lose your seed phrase. You might, it's only $100. It's only a couple $100. Get started. Look at that as, assume you're going to lose the seed phrase, right? Assume you're going to, it's just like you go to Vegas and you're going to hit the tables. You don't assume you're going to win. You assume you're going to lose, and you're going to have fun doing that. You're going to learn something by doing it, right? And so I think you just need to open your mind out to, hey, I might screw up. I might lose it. I'm an idiot. Everybody who's been in Bitcoin has lost Bitcoin. You won't be alone. We've all done stupid stuff. So
I'm curious with the spot Bitcoin ETFs. Clearly those have had a tremendous amount of success, over 20 billion in net inflows. But as somebody such as yourself, who you are so close to the just the real ethos of Bitcoin, are you for or against the ETFs? Because again, there is a pretty vocal camp who believes these ETFs are completely against the ethos of Bitcoin, that bringing Bitcoin into the TradFi. How do you feel about that?
So I've been very for, one of the things is I've been a Bitcoiner for a while, right? But I've not really been involved on Bitcoin Twitter until really December of last year. And I was so for this idea of ETFs. And I really viewed that this is going to hit such an important intersection that I made a video and I sort of said, raise my hand. I said, hey guys, I'm both worlds here. I'm the intersection. I'm the Venn diagram intersection of the TradFi guy who spent a lot of time on Wall Street, knows a lot of friends on Wall Street, right? And the hardcore Bitcoiner, right? Who has 70% of, at this point, 70+% of my net worth in Bitcoin, right? And I'm the intersection of those two. And I'm here to tell you that, number one, if Larry Fink is behind this ETF, it's going to happen. Number one, that's the first thing I said. And number two, it's a really big deal. And I felt like both the Bitcoiner and the Bitcoiners at that time were like, no, it's not a big deal. It's uninteresting. People shouldn't be putting their money in these ETFs. And I also felt the finance people really underestimated the opportunity, right? And and I kind of met Eric at an event from Bloomberg, and I was just like, I don't think you get it, how big this is going to be. And it's not even how big it's going to be this year. It's just how big this intersection of you just enabled. Larry Fink has just enabled TradFi to own this asset, and the combination is explosive. And you ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, I just think that this is such such an explosive combination. This is like the nitro and the glycerin. You put it together, you get something completely explosive. And I think that's where we are with this thing.
So, in terms of where we might be heading, and again, none of this is investment advice,
No.
but with the potential price of Bitcoin moving forward, I see you tweeting quite often about Bitcoin's power law or
Yeah.
the power law model. Do you want to explain that in layman's terms? What this
Sure.
is, why you
Okay.
think it's important?
Okay. So if you look at the price of Bitcoin, and let's just take a look at it from a typical TradFi perspective, right? They look at it and they go, well, way back again, 2013, it was like, it was under $1,000. Then it crashed, and then in 2017 we had this speculative boom, and it got all the way up to $20,000. Then it crashed, and then it went up to $60,000. Then we had Sam Bankman-Fried and a bunch of other stuff, and then it crashed. Now we're back. So we're kind of at the high end of the range, right? That's the perception of the history of Bitcoin from a traditional investor, right? Now, and they're like, well, I don't want to own something like that. It just sounds like complete risky. It's all over the map. We're back to where we were 4 years ago, but whatever. And and so you really need to zoom out, and you need to look at this data in a different on a different with different axes. You need to look at it as in the logarithmic of log of price, right? And you need to also look at the log of time, right, since the Genesis block. And if you start doing this, you actually can analyze what's happened mathematically, and you notice that it's a very very tight range, right? And we're having this kind of growth, which is not exponential. It's a power law, so it's a little sub-exponential, but it's very steady and it's incredibly high correlation, right? So it has like a 95% correlation. And so you're like, how's that possible? How do we have something that is a price of an asset that has such high correlation and behaves in such a regular fashion, right? Although it doesn't seem regular when you don't look at it in log terms, but when you look at it in log terms, it's very, very regular. And it turns out that there's many, many, many things like that in Bitcoin. So the addresses, the amount of addresses that contain one Bitcoin is also a power law. The amount of addresses that contain a million sats is a power law. The amount of the hash rate is that we have, right? The amount of total hash rate of the system is a power law. And these things, the chance of all these things being power laws and having correlations between 95 and 97% is just statistically it's not possible that it's random, right? It's just not, right? And I know enough stats, and I've seen enough mathematical models. This is like such an outlier that I've never seen anything like this at all in my entire life before. When I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, this is wow. The stats are so compelling. And I think it really does give you some predictive measure, some means of predicting the future. And I think, a lot of people say the future can't be predicted, but of course the future can be predicted. If you said, well, the American population is growing at 3% a year, and then somebody said, well, what do you expect the American population to be in 10 years? You'd say, well, probably something like 34% higher, right, with compounding. And that's what you'd get, right? Now, if you look at what percentage of people do you think are going to be adopting Bitcoin in 10 years, given that we have, sort of 1 million, really hardcore Bitcoin users, and as much as maybe 100 million very casual Bitcoin users now. Well, we're gonna get to something like 1 billion, users in 10 years. It's just a growth. It's like population growth. It's like the growth of a virus. So, I think all this stuff gives is a very strong argument, and is is not understood by Wall Street generally, and I've tried to educate people as best I can on it, and I think we're having some success now. Uh, if, one of my fellow mathematicians, Giovanni, who is the first person to discover the power law, has now met with Fidelity, and they're going to write a research piece on the power law. Which is great. I love that. Right. I would like BlackRock to start talking about the power law. Because I think it's a great tool for onboarding people. And it comes with caveats. It's not like it's going to go up directly from here to there. There will be gut wrenching bear markets, but it gives you some framework to analyze this craziness that's happened, over 6 orders of magnitude, right? So the first Bitcoin price that it was traded at on an exchange was about 10 cents, right? And now we're order of magnitude $100,000. So it's gone up 1 million times. Now, if you look at the hash rate has gone up 1 quadrillion times. And yet both of those time series, one that's gone up 1,000,000x and the other one's gone up 1 quadrillion-x, both of them, if you plot them in log terms, they're pretty tight, and the hash rate one is actually even tighter than the regular one, which already has 95% correlation. So I think these are very strong reasons why you should, I think there's a lot of good reasons to believe that these things will continue. There's no reason to believe they won't continue, and they give you comfort on the downside, and I think they give you a little bit of bounds on the upside as well, right? So a lot of people are saying it's going to go to $1 million next year. Honestly, it's not. So
let me ask you this, just to play devil's advocate. So I think you did a good job of describing that there. The math is the math, the stats are the stats. But do you see any potential existential risk to Bitcoin in that something could go catastrophically wrong, whether that be regulatory or, I don't know, maybe another digital asset comes along and supplants Bitcoin? Because, I think we would both agree nothing is 100% without risk. So, what are those risks for Bitcoin?
Well, let's take each of these two things in turn. So, on the regulatory front, we've had this, in the history of Bitcoin, it's been banned by China, it's been banned by Russia. It's the ETF has been denied. The first ETF attempt was by the Winklevi 10 years ago, right? So it's taken us 10 years to get to the ETF. We've had all kinds of banning and regulatory attacks on ETF on Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't care, right? Bitcoin will survive any individual nation doing anything against it. It will, and it is built in a very, very. It is the ultimate decentralized tool, and part of it is you really have to understand how it was built and why I think it is, it has that. But it's been battle tested. And I think there's a 0 chance that Bitcoin becomes outlawed or killed by regulation. It's not going to happen. Okay. And in fact, I think it's more likely now than ever to be integrated into the financial system as opposed to just fought. So that's number one. Number two, the other currency stuff, right? Now that was definitely, it took me until 2019 to really get over that one, right? I bought my first Bitcoin in 2013, right? And I sold it in 2013 as well. Right? So brilliant, Fred. You doubled your money, great. I think I've always, and a lot of people have this view that there's so many of these cryptocurrencies, so many good ideas, right? And, we've all been, drank from the diversification Kool-Aid, and we have these different ideas that we're bringing to the table, right? So we were like, okay, well, we have MySpace, we had Facebook, we had AOL, we had Yahoo, we had Google, There's always, in tech, there's always there's always a new thing, right? There's always a new, shinier, better, faster, cheaper thing, right? And shouldn't that be the same with Bitcoin? And as a guy now who's witnessed this stuff, I can tell you that's not going to happen. And I made a tweet, and I just sort of, all the people in the system laughed at my tweet because it's very true. So, we had Bitcoin came out, and it was sort of like, we're digital money, okay? Peer-to-peer digital money. And then, of course, Ethereum came out, got announced in 2015. They did their ICO, and it's like, well, we're kind of like, we're the world computer. We're like, we've got these smart contracts, and, blah, blah. And then, great. And then, we had EOS. We're going to win because we raised the most money, so we're going to win. And then, then Ripple, like, we're tied into the banking system, so we're going to win. And then Solana was like, we're faster than anybody else, so we're going to win, right? And we're cheaper. And then, then there was Flow that we've got the NBA and the NFL, so we're going to get everybody loves the NBA and the NFL, so everybody's going to buy our NFTs, and we're going to win, And so then we've had these newer ones. So we came out of Meta, so we have the best technology. Facebook has, the footprint of everything. So clearly we're going to win. And the reality is none of these things have actually worked. None of these ideas have actually worked. The killer app has been from day one and will remain. The killer app is money. That's the killer app. The killer app is money. It's where do you store your value, and how do you? And it doesn't matter that it takes 10 minutes to fully transfer a Bitcoin. It doesn't matter, right? That's not because the use case is I'm transferring $1,000, right, or 10,000, or 100, a million, $1 billion, right? That's the use case, and it's very simple. And Bitcoin is perfect product market fit for this, and is now backed by effectively 600 exahashes worth of hash power. Nobody's catching up with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's won. I mean, that's just it. And yet there will be for the next 10 years there will be another 10 attempts. 100 thousands of attempts, and they will all fail. And it's not to say that these other cryptocurrencies are not going to have some use. They will, okay? But where I think I've argued with you on your space when the ETH ETF came out, I said, look, ETH is it's not going to die. It's not worth. At the time, it was like a third of Bitcoin's valuation. Now it's a quarter of Bitcoin's valuation. I think ETH is going to go to 1% of Bitcoin's valuation, right? So, because ETH is competing with Solana, with Aptos, with Sui, with protocols that haven't even been invented yet, right? And everybody's competing in this kind of like Hunger Games of these layer ones, and Bitcoin's in a complete class of itself, and what Bitcoin is competing against the U.S. dollar, it's competing with bonds, and it's competing with real estate, and it's competing with the S&P 500, right? So, I see this world completely changing, and I think TradFi, Bitcoin's going to completely change TradFi, and with all due respect to the Bloomberg guys and their like 60-40 models, it's like. I'm old enough to remember when 60-40 wasn't a thing, when I was at Salomon Brothers, the bond desk was the first class cabin, and the equity desk was definitely Coach, and people would not consider putting 60% of their net worth in equities. It was not. But we now have this new religion of indexing and diversification and 60-40 and hot sauce this and that, throw in a little India ETF and all this stuff. And so I think the way in the door is the ETF. That's how Bitcoin gets in the door. But, ultimately Bitcoin's taking over everything. And, Bitcoin is going to be the new 60%, it's going to be 60% Bitcoin and 40% everything else. I think that's where we're headed. It may be 60% Bitcoin, 40% S&P. That might be the new mix. But it's going to take us a while to get there. But it may not take that long just because of price appreciation of Bitcoin. If you believe that the stats continue, right, in 20 years, Bitcoin is going to be at $10 million a coin. At $10 million a coin, it's getting up there in terms of a third of the entire value of the global financial ecosystem. And you won't be able, it'll be the biggest play. And so I agree with Larry Fink that Bitcoin is going to eclipse U.S. real estate in terms of market cap. He said that recently, or I at least implied it, right? But I think that's actually going to happen, So I'm ultra bullish in the long term. In the short term, you can't trade the thing. It's and that's why I love these Bitcoin ETFs. I think they're the best. They're the best possible way for individuals to participate in this thing. But I would avoid the Ethereum ETF.
Okay, so there is a lot that you just laid out there. We only have a few minutes left. I think what I'll pull a thread on is with additional crypto assets, Fred, wouldn't it be helpful to Bitcoin if some of those other digital assets were successful? And that if you have more people who are comfortable interacting in the digital asset ecosystem, I would think that would be beneficial to Bitcoin, because in my opinion, I agree with you in that I think Bitcoin has already won in many ways. I don't think that's set in stone. I may not be quite as optimistic as you, but I think if we're sitting here today, it looks like the winner. However, I don't know, do we want to say no other crypto assets can ever be successful? Because I feel like if we said that, it almost minimizes the relevance of Bitcoin, if that makes sense. Because we're saying there's just only one digital asset. There's no other digital asset ecosystem out there. Does that make sense?
No, I don't. I don't think it makes sense. So I think you're making the flaw that all these things are apples and oranges. They're in the same. They're comparable. Bitcoin is not another digital asset. It's not. It's a different animal. Okay, and all the other digital assets, they're in one big pond together. Every single one of them, right? Every one of those things has a team behind it. They have some guy who's like ultimately pulling the strings. They have some bunch of investors that are doing. Bitcoin does not have a CEO. They have no team. There's no upgrade path to Bitcoin. There's nothing. It has equivalent of 25 nuclear reactors of energy making Bitcoin every day and going up, right? And so it's a completely different animal than all these other cryptos. And, will these other cryptos be useful? Sure. AWS could be useful also, right? And I view that these other cryptos really are at some point glorified databases. Are they useful? Yeah, they can be useful. But, wallets are useful to Bitcoin too, right? And I wouldn't kind of take out a third mortgage to invest in Ledger. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay. It's a useful technology. Some of these things are going to be useful as transport layers to Bitcoin. I'll use a railroad analogy, right? In John D. Rockefeller's time, before he really became the richest man on the planet, the railroads were the main thing. And then the railroads became mainly a way of transporting John D. Rockefeller's oil, right? That was mainly what was running on the railroads at a certain point in time, right? And then, then John D. Rockefeller became so rich and he said, you know what, I don't need your railroads anymore. I'll just use pipelines. So, I think the railroads, that's kind of what you have. You got a bunch of these railroad stocks, and I think they have a little bit of a life kind of helping Bitcoin get to the next level. At some point, we won't need these railroad stocks anymore. We're going to have pipelines. We're going to have lightning. We're not going to need any of this stuff. and we're going to go into full hyper Bitcoinization, which is where I think we're going. And this is why I'm ultimately so bullish. And to plug my book, which is completely
Yes, and let's talk. But by the way, it sounds like at some point you expect this podcast to be renamed Bitcoin Prime. It will no longer be named Crypto Prime.
I would encourage you to do that, but I mean, you're basically, yeah, I would hope you would do that, but yeah, look, I think, I focus on one cryptocurrency in this book. It's a 300-page art book that's devoted to one cryptocurrency, which is the one I think will make the difference in the world, right? The other ones, nothing. It doesn't matter. So
Yeah, so tell us more about the book. I agree. I was looking at this online. I mean, this thing is a complete piece of art. It's unbelievable.
It is. Yeah. Well, it's a complete different thing that you'd ever see. Okay. It is basically, hold on one second, I killed that. Basically what we decided to do, we wanted to make an art book of sort of a Bitcoin Bible for us Bitcoiners, right? And it's not cheap to do, right? So we use archival papers, like uncoded stuff. We went to the only printers that could make such a thing. We had graphic designers recode all these things, take your chart, build it into this beautiful thing. We license all these images. We reached out to the founders of pre-Bitcoin, Diffie-Hellman, who invented cryptography, right? We reached out to them, right? And so we got all this stuff, and basically our goal really with this thing, and I'm going to send you a book, by the way, Nate, and you were on my list of people to get a free book, and the reason why I want you to have this is I think this book will help you orange pill more people, right?
I love it.
You see, and that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, is not to make money, right? It's literally, I feel like, how can I impact the most people on Bitcoin? Well, it's to get people, like Tom Lee, like, Senator Loomis, like, JD Vance, or people like Joe Kernan, right? I want to have them have some physical thing that they can flip through at any page and go, oh my God, look at that. You know what I mean? And so I think this thing could be just a tremendous tool for spreading the word on Wall Street, right? So you are my target market. I want you guys, who are in position, the Eric, James Seifert, all these guys who are who've been following this stuff now. I want them to really have this kind of vision of where it came from, where it's gone, what it's heading, the whole ecosystem in a sort of visual format. So that's kind of what we did in the book. And, we did this book, and we sold out in 13 hours of the book. We are sort of on a wait list. We're considering us a second edition, so we're not saying anything about that yet. But look, it's a propaganda thing. It's like Mao Zedong's little red book. We are trying to, if we can convince people that message that I told you is correct. It helps Bitcoin. And look, I've done so well with Bitcoin that I just, and it's like me and everybody else. It doesn't matter how much you made on Bitcoin. At some point, you're like, okay, I just got to I got to carry the torch, to the next guy to carry the torch, And I feel like we feel like that very strong, that this asset is going to change the world, and And
I love that. First of all, thank you. I can't wait to see this book.
I hope you tweet it when you open it up, and if you like it, if you go, oh man, this is great. Here's my picture in the book.
I'm sure I'll like it. And you know what I love that you said there. I mean, in our interests are completely aligned. It's one of my goals with this podcast is really just to help educate people on what's occurring here. And it sounds like that's certainly a motivation of yours and a big thrust of this book.
Crypto Prime is hosted by Nate Geraci, president of OTR Media LLC. Nate is also president of the investment advisory firm The ETF Store. While OTR Media LLC and the ETF Store are related by common ownership, they are separate and distinct entities, and anything discussed on this program should not be construed as an official statement by the ETF Store. This program is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Investing in crypto assets involves substantial risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any past performance figures discussed are not necessarily indicative of future results. Visit CryptoPrimePodcast.com for more information.